photograph had yellowed with time. A man in his 50s, grey coat, slight smile. Dr. Howard Crane, stabbed 14 times in his study the night of November 3rd, 1995. Case closed in just 3 months. Convicted? His 22-year-old intern, James Fallow. Motive? A supposed argument over malpractice files. I read the summary again. Too simple. Too neat. James had confessed, but it was the kind of confession that stinks of exhaustion, not guilt. The evidence? His fingerprints were everywhere. Of course they were. He worked there. No witness, no forced entry, a bloodied shirt found in the intern's apartment, but no murder weapon, and most importantly, no real story. I flipped to the last page of the file. A note in the margins caught my eye, barely legible under decades of dust and poor ink. He was already dying. Who wrote it? When? And what the hell did it mean? Ashmore Valley had been quiet for 30 years. Now I had to go back to the place where silence had been weaponized. Not to prove a man innocent, but to see who had needed him to be guilty. Ashmore Valley hadn't changed. Same fog-drenched streets, same crooked lamppost, same eyes peering out from behind curtains. The air reeked of pine and forgotten secrets. I drove past the old pharmacy, now boarded up. A kid on a rusted bike watched me like I didn't belong here. He was right. The Crane house still stood, a large, tired structure on Hawthorne Lane, now owned by the town council. No one had lived in it since the murder. They called it cursed. Some even said you could still hear Crane's final screams behind the walls. Nonsense. People lie to feel safe. I parked across the street. The police station was 2 blocks down, small, cramped. The same sheriff still worked there, Marshal Tibbins. He looked older, slower, but his eyes were sharp. "You're digging up old bones, Schatten," he said, voice low. I nodded. Bones don't rot when they're buried in the wrong grave. He didn't smile, just handed me the original evidence list. Still no mention of a murder weapon. Still no witness statement from the neighbor who claimed to hear 2 male voices that night. Why was that redacted? Someone had been erased, and I had a feeling they never really left town. Her name was Myrtle Lancaster. 83 now. Back then, she was 53 and lived directly across from the Crane residence. I found her in a sun-faded recliner, knitting something colorless. Her hand shook, but her memory didn't. "They told me not to talk," she said, eyes fixed on the window. "Said I must have imagined it, that grief plays tricks." "What did you hear that night, Myrtle?" She paused. Voices. 2 of them. One was Dr. Crane's, sharp, agitated. The other was younger, louder. Not James. The second voice was calling him Howie. Nobody called him that but one person. I leaned forward. "Who?" She lowered her voice. "Mason Delroy." That name hadn't appeared in the files, not once. Myrtle continued. "They fought, then silence, and then someone ran out the back. Delroy was the town's golden boy in the 90s, Crane's protege, went on to become a respected surgeon in Chicago, untouched, unmentioned. I checked the court records again, no deposition, no statement, not even a mention. Erased. If Mason had been there and no one followed up, then this wasn't just negligence, it was protection. And someone had decided James Fallow was easier to bury than the truth. Called the hospital in Chicago. Dr. Mason Delroy still worked there, head of cardiothoracic surgery. Polished website, flawless reviews, clean record. Too clean. I posed as a medical journalist and secured a brief phone interview. His voice came through smooth, rehearsed. But when I brought up Howard Crane, there was a pause, barely half a second, but enough. He was a mentor, Mason said. His death was tragic. I mentioned Ashmore Valley. Another pause. I haven't been back in years, he added. I moved on. I hadn't mentioned going back. After the call, I combed through archived newspapers. One photo from 1995 showed Mason at Crane's funeral, tears in his eyes, arm around Crane's widow, Valerie. No mention of that relationship in any document, not even a statement from Valerie during the investigation. That wasn't an oversight, that was design. I drove to the public library and pulled Valerie's address from the 1995 town registry. She'd vanished 2 years after the trial. No forwarding address, no trace. But in one of Crane's old journals recovered from the crime scene, a final entry stood out. Mason knows. He always knew, but I was the fool who trusted love more than truth. This wasn't about malpractice. This was about betrayal, and maybe something deeper, something worth killing for. Valerie Crane was a ghost. No tax records, no phone number, no known relatives. The last anyone saw her was during James Fallow's sentencing. Dressed in black, silent, unmoving. Then she disappeared. The town chalked it up to grief. I didn't. I went back to the Crane house. The inside was untouched, like a photograph sealed in amber. Dust thick on the piano, a clock still ticking on a wall that hadn't seen sunlight in decades. In the study, I opened the lower drawers of Howard's desk. One stuck. Inside, a sealed envelope. No name, just a date. November 2nd, 1995. 1 day before the murder. The letter was written in Valerie's hand. Shaky, emotional. Howard, I can't do this anymore. He's not who you think he is. What we had, it was never real to him. He came to me again last night, said you were in the way. I should have told you sooner. Forgive me. But please, if anything happens, don't let James take the fall. I froze. She knew something was coming. She tried to warn him, and somehow the letter never made it into evidence. Either no one found it, or someone did, and made sure it vanished. Mason Delroy had access, motive, and Valerie may have been the only person who could prove it, unless she'd already paid for it. If I was right, the story the town had believed for 30 years was a lie built on silence, and silence has a shelf life. The Ashmore Town Hall kept a thin archive of property deeds and residency transfers. I wasn't looking for the past. I was looking for someone who never left it. Frankie Dell, groundskeeper. He'd worked for the Crane family for over 15 years, and according to the records, still lived on the outskirts of town, in a run-down trailer behind the old lumber yard. I found him, sitting on a splintered porch, rolling a cigarette with trembling fingers and eyes like soaked ash. He didn't ask who I was, just nodded like he'd been expecting me for years. "You're here for the doctor," he muttered. "You were there that night." He took a long drag before answering. "I saw him leave, Mason, through the back garden. He didn't run, just walked, like it was over, like it was planned. Why didn't you say anything?" He laughed, bitter. "I did. They said I was drunk, said I was grieving, said if I didn't shut up, they'd shut me up. And then my truck caught fire a week later." He looked me in the eye. "Everyone knew, Schatten, but no one wanted the storm the truth brings, so they gave it a name they could survive. James." That was it, the final nail. It wasn't just a miscarriage of justice. It was a choice. The whole town had chosen the clean lie over the bloody truth. And now that truth was surfacing, corpse gray and ice cold. The Ashmore Medical Board kept meticulous records, at least on paper. I requested the personnel logs from 1995. A beige folder arrived, thick with dust but thin in content. Most files were intact, all except one, Mason Delroy. His appointment form was missing, but not completely. A fragment remained in the back of the folder, like someone had tried to tear it out and failed. The ink had bled, but a name was visible. Valerie Crane, emergency authorization. She had signed off on his access to patient records just weeks before the murder. He wasn't just a former student. He had administrative clearance, enough to reach the malpractice files Dr. Crane had been compiling. I checked the patients listed in the malpractice report. 2 had died under Delroy's supervision during his training, both deemed accidental at the time. But the second, a young woman named Emily Rosner, had a brother, still listed as next of kin. I found him. Isaac Rosner now worked in a junkyard 50 miles north. I visited under heavy rain, his face aged by grief, hands scarred by time. "Mason killed her," he said, before I asked anything. "He sedated her wrong. Crane knew. He promised to expose it. Then Crane died." Isaac had sent a letter to the police in 1996. Never answered. Buried again. Delroy had motive. Silence Crane, erase the risk, frame a nobody like James, someone too young, too scared, too easy. But one thing still haunted me. Why did Valerie stay silent? Valerie Crane had vanished from the official record, but not from memory. Old neighbors remembered a moving truck in the dead of night, a suitcase, a man waiting behind the wheel. Not James, and definitely not grief. I traced property records from 1997. A small cabin purchased under a false name, Eleanor V. Rains. Remote, high in the hills past Ashmore's edge. No electricity, no neighbors, just trees and time. I went there. The cabin was still intact. Moss-covered, windows boarded, mailbox rusted shut. Inside, everything smelled like cedar and regret. On a mantel above a cold fireplace stood a single framed photo, Howard, smiling, torn across the middle, the other half missing. Beside it a box of tapes, old cassette recordings labeled only by date. I took them. Back in town, I borrowed a dusty tape deck from the library basement. I played the first one. Valerie's voice, soft, strained, tired. I know what he did. I know who he is. But if I speak, I die. And Howard's death becomes mine too. I was weak, but I'll keep the truth alive until someone braver comes along. My hands clenched. She hadn't disappeared. She'd been silenced, not by force, but by fear. And the only thing more terrifying than a murderer is a community that protects him. I listened to 5 tapes, each one darker than the last. Valerie had recorded her descent, not into madness, but into understanding. Her voice changed over time. The softness faded. What remained was bitterness and guilt. He told me I was special, she said in one. Said he loved how I made him feel human again. Then one night, he showed me a report. A patient had died. Said Howard was going to make it public, that we'd both go down if he did. Delroy had manipulated her, wrapped her in lust and fear, used her proximity to the doctor to track his movements, read his files, isolate him, and she let him. Until the night everything shattered. I told Mason to stop, I begged. He said it was already done. I remember his hands. They were cold when he kissed my forehead. One of the final tapes contained something else. A name. Not Mason. A man named Burke Ellis. Ex-cop, now private contractor. She said Mason hired him for cleanup if things went wrong. I found Ellis. Retired in Nevada. Bought a lakeside house in cash in 1996. Quiet life, quiet man. I made one call, no threats, no lies. Just a sentence. James Fallow is still in prison for what you buried. There was silence on the line. Then, I only covered the exit. I didn't kill him, but I know who did. He hung up. The noose was tightening. Mason Delroy had lived 30 years inside a lie, and now the lie was cracking. The name Burke Ellis wasn't in any police file, not local, not federal, but the bank that processed his 1996 lake house purchase confirmed a wire transfer from a private medical fund in Chicago under a shell corporation once tied to Mason Delroy's residency program. Ellis didn't speak again, but he didn't need to. The transaction was proof enough. Hush money. Clean getaway for a dirty night. I returned to the Crane crime scene once more, this time with new eyes. The back garden, overgrown and brittle, had a broken gate latch. Police photos never mentioned it. I pried it open. The soil beneath was soft, darker than the rest. I dug with my bare hands. 7 inches down, I found it. A folding knife. Rusted, sealed in a plastic bag, faded initials on the handle, M.D. It had been there the whole time. Outside the scope of the official search area, just far enough. I turned it in anonymously to the county lab. 24 hours later, a hit. Howard Crane's blood. And under the grip, a partial print. Inconclusive, but matching pattern types consistent with Delroy's archived prints. No more shadows, no more what if. Delroy had killed Crane. And someone, maybe Valerie, maybe Ellis, had hidden the blade, hoping one day someone would find it. That day had come. And James Fallow? He'd been caged for a crime committed with a hand far more surgical than his own. I filed the evidence through a third-party legal contact in Portland. The recovered knife, the wire transfer, the tapes. Within 48 hours, the district court agreed to re-examine the case of James Fallow. A retrial was authorized. I expected headlines. Instead, I got silence. Ashmore Valley didn't rejoice. It recoiled. Stores closed early. Doors that once cautiously opened now locked before I approached. Even Sheriff Tibbins refused to meet my eyes. "You should leave it alone," he muttered. "The town moved on." "No," I said. "The town buried it." I received a message that night. A typed note slipped under my motel door. No name, no greeting, just, "He's not afraid of prison. He's afraid of her." I read it 3 times, then played the final tape Valerie had recorded, one I hadn't dared listen to before. Her voice was low, ragged. "I'm tired of hiding. I wrote a letter to the press. I told them everything. But if something happens to me, then Mason made that choice for both of us. Tell whoever finds this the knife is in the garden." She'd planted the blade, planted the truth, and now I knew why she disappeared. Not to hide, to make sure the lie didn't live longer than the man who told it. But Mason wasn't running, he was preparing. Delroy hadn't responded to the court order. His legal team claimed he was on a surgical retreat in Geneva. But I knew better. He was buying time to bury connections, scrub records, maybe disappear for good. I flew to Chicago, not with a badge, just with the truth. North Shore Medical towered above the skyline like it had nothing to hide. I walked in through the front entrance. No appointment, no hesitation. I found his assistant in the cardiac wing. "I need to speak with Dr. Delroy. It's urgent." She blinked. "He's in conference. No visitors." I placed the knife photo on her desk. Her hands trembled. "Tell him," I said, "Herr Schatten came looking, and I don't knock twice." 30 minutes later, a man in a charcoal suit stepped into the corridor, clean-shaven, polished, dead behind the eyes. "Schatten," he said softly, almost amused. "Didn't think ghosts traveled first class." "Ghosts dig," I replied, "and I found your grave." He smiled. "You have nothing admissible." "You think the court matters to me?" The smile faded. "I'm not here to prosecute, Mason. I'm here to expose. People forget verdicts. They don't forget stories." He didn't speak again, just turned and walked away. But his hands, they trembled. Later that night, I received a message from a blocked number. "If you tell this story, you won't live to hear the end." That was fine by me. I never cared for endings. The retrial for James Fallow was set. No press, no cameras, just a clerk in a dusty room with more ghosts than witnesses. Mason Delroy didn't show. His lawyer submitted a statement of non-cooperation due to irreversible psychological strain. Convenient. But something had shifted. Valerie's tapes, submitted anonymously, reached the inbox of a freelance investigative journalist. 2 days later, the story broke. Buried truth. How Ashmore Valley framed the wrong man. Within hours it spread like rot through polished wood, national attention, public outrage, and still the town refused to speak. I returned to Ashmore to witness the reaction. Nothing had changed, except the silence. People crossed the street when they saw me. Some whispered, some watched. One man spat at my feet and muttered, "You ruined this town." No, I didn't ruin it. I just turned on the light. Sheriff Tibbins called me in. His hands shook when he poured the coffee. "He was one of us," he said quietly. "Delroy. We raised him, protected him." "You protected a murderer." He didn't deny it. "I saw the bruises on Valerie's arms," he whispered. "She asked for help once. I told her to go home." He looked at me then, truly looked. I thought silence was mercy. "It never is," I said. "It's just delayed damage." Outside, the fog rolled in thick, familiar, heavy. But this time, the town had no place left to hide. Mason Delroy resigned from his position 2 days after the story broke. No charges, no arrest, just a letter citing medical burnout and a first-class ticket to Switzerland. But before he boarded, he left something behind, a sealed envelope addressed to the Ashmore District Court. No confession, just a statement. I was never the only one. Inside the envelope, a single photo. Valerie and Mason smiling in front of the Crane house, dated 1 week before the murder. Her hand on his chest, his eyes somewhere else, cold, calculating. It wasn't proof, but it was a wound reopened. Valerie's tapes became public. Overnight, she became a symbol of swallowed truth. Some called her a coward, others a prisoner. But one thing was certain, her voice was no longer buried. I visited James Fallow at the state penitentiary, 30 years older, grey hair, lined face, but still standing. "They said I might be free soon," he said, voice thin. "You should have been free 30 years ago." He shook his head. "No, I wasn't innocent." I froze. "I didn't kill him," James said, eyes sharp, "but I hated him. I wished him dead, every day. Maybe that's why it was easy for them to choose me. Guilt without action. It was enough back then, but not anymore. Justice was no longer a verdict. It was a reckoning, one truth at a time. James Fallow walked out of the courthouse a free man. No reporters, no family waiting, just rain and the long shadow of a life stolen. He didn't speak, didn't look back. How could he? There was nothing behind him worth holding on to. The town issued no apology, no monument, no correction printed in the local paper. Ashmore simply moved on, as it always had. Truth here didn't echo, it sank. Mason Delroy never returned. His medical license was quietly suspended. He lived now in a villa by a lake, untouched, unpunished, but not unseen. Valerie's tapes became archived at a non-profit for judicial reform. Her name, once erased, now introduced seminars on systemic failure. They called her brave, they called her broken. Both were true. Sheriff Tibbins retired the following week. No statement, just left his badge on the desk and disappeared into the fog that had raised him. As for me, I returned to the motel one last time, packed my notes, locked the case file. Then I sat in the dark and played the final seconds of the final tape. Valerie's voice, barely a whisper. If you're hearing this, thank you for not letting it end the way they wanted. I lit a match, held it to the edge of the photo Delroy left behind. The flame crawled slow. Some stories don't need a courtroom. They need a witness.